The ring was still in my jacket pocket when I walked into that party. Not my ex's ring. Not an engagement ring. It was a cheap silver band I'd found wedged under the seat of my car 3 weeks after Carla left one of those adjustable ones from a street vendor, the kind that turns your finger green after a Tuesday. I'd been meaning to throw it out. I'd been meaning to do a lot of things. That was 8 months after the divorce. 8 months of eating cereal for dinner, of waking up at 3 in the morning to the specific silence that means you are the only person in the house, of driving past the apartment we used to share on Belmore Avenue not because it was on the way to anywhere, but because I hadn't figured out how to stop yet. Let me back up. I'm a land surveyor. I walk the edges of things for a living. I measure where one person's property ends and another one's begins. I draw the invisible lines that people will spend decades fighting over. Some people find that depressing. I always thought it was honest. Somebody has to mark what's yours and what isn't. Somebody has to know where the boundary is. Carla and I were together 6 years and married for 2. She left in September. I say she left because that's what happened. But I've been a surveyor long enough to know that boundaries don't just move on their own. Somebody draws them somewhere wrong first. She left for reasons I understood eventually, even if I didn't at the time. We wanted different things, which sounds like the polite way to say nothing, but in our case it was the actual truth. She wanted movement, newness, momentum. I wanted to stay still long enough to actually know where I was standing. We circled that argument for years without ever naming it. By the time we did, there wasn't much left. Anyway, the party. It was the first weekend in May, and I went because my buddy Derek told me the food would be good and that I needed to leave my apartment for reasons unrelated to work. Derek has a gift for framing things in the least romantic way possible. He was right, though. I'd been leaving my apartment for approximately 2 reasons: my job and a diner on 5th Street where the waitress knew my order, and that was not a full life. The party was at a house out in Garfield, one of those older neighborhoods where the oak trees have gotten so big they crack the sidewalks just by existing. Nice place. I didn't know whose it was. I didn't know most of the people there. I knew one person. Nadia was standing near the kitchen doorway when I came in, holding a glass of white wine with both hands the way people hold things when they're not sure they belong in a room. She was wearing a blue dress, the kind of blue that looks almost gray in certain light, and her hair was shorter than I remembered. She looked like someone who'd made a decision recently and was still deciding if it had been the right one. I hadn't seen Nadia in almost a year. I'd actually never spent much time with her. She was Carla's younger sister, which means she existed in my life as a peripheral figure, a face at holiday dinners, a voice through the phone in the background of calls. We'd had maybe 4 real conversations in 6 years. She had a kind of watchful quality that I'd always registered but never thought much about. The type of person who listens more than they talk, and then, when they do say something, you realize they've been paying attention the whole time. She saw me before I saw her. I know this because by the time I registered who she was, she had already adjusted her expression, not into something fake, just into something more settled, more prepared, like she'd had a second to decide how she wanted to be in this moment. "Marcus," she said. "Nadia." I stopped a few feet away. Hey. That was the full extent of what we had ready. We stood there for a moment while the party moved around us, and I became aware that I was still holding my jacket, that I'd just walked in, that I had nowhere to be and no particular reason to stay. "I didn't know you'd be here," I said. "Derek invited me." She tilted her head slightly. "He invited half the city, I think. He has poor boundaries." The corner of her mouth moved. "He really does." We found 2 spots on the back porch, which was less about wanting to be on the back porch and more about neither of us knowing how to walk away from a conversation that had just barely started. The yard was that specific kind of overgrown that looks intentional, all tall grass and a rusted metal chair that had been sitting in the same spot for maybe 30 years. Someone had strung Edison bulbs along the fence. The whole thing had the feeling of a place where something was slowly returning to itself. We talked for a while, or she talked, mostly, and I listened. which was a reversal of the dynamic I'd expected, given what I remembered about her. She was working as a paralegal for a firm downtown. She'd been doing it for 3 years, was thinking about law school, but wasn't sure if she wanted it enough or just wanted to want it. She had a cat named Gerald who had what she described as strong opinions about breakfast timing. She'd moved out of the apartment she shared with a roommate 6 months ago and was now renting a place on her own, for the first time, which she said was either the bravest thing she'd done or the loneliest, and she kept going back and forth on it. I understood that one. At some point, and I need you to understand, this came from nowhere. Came from the specific looseness that sets in after you've been standing in the same spot for 45 minutes, drinking a beer you'd stopped tasting, talking to someone who keeps looking at you like they're actually waiting for the answer. I said something I shouldn't have. Someone inside the house made a toast. Through the screen door, I could hear glasses clinking, people laughing, someone announcing that so-and-so were getting engaged. There was a burst of applause. The whole thing drifted out to us like music from a neighboring apartment. Nadia looked at me. There's going to be a lot of that this year. Everyone I know is either getting married or getting divorced. I've done my part, I said. She laughed, a real one, surprised, and I felt something shift in my chest that I didn't acknowledge. I guess you have. You're next, I said, and then, because the evening had gotten soft and the lights were warm and I was a man who apparently still had no working internal sensor, I said, "You should just marry me. Get it over with." I said it like a joke. It was a joke. I am almost certain I meant it as a joke. Nadia looked at me. She had dark brown eyes, one of those faces where the expression doesn't change dramatically but everything underneath it moves. She looked at me for what felt like a long time, but was probably 3 seconds. Then she reached out. Not tentatively, not hesitantly. She reached out with the steady deliberateness of someone who has already made up their mind, and she took my hand. Not held it. Took it. The distinction matters. She said, "Come with me." And she turned and walked back into the house, and my hand was in hers, and I followed her. I want to be careful about what I say happened next, because the version in my head has been colored by everything that came after, and I don't want to give it more meaning than it had in that moment. What happened was she led me up the stairs. It was her cousin's house. I found out later she'd been there a dozen times, and she brought me to a small room at the end of the hall, a kind of den or study, with bookshelves and a window seat and one of those floor lamps that cast a circle of light like a spotlight on nothing. She let go of my hand. She sat in the window seat with her wine glass still in her other hand, set it down on the sill, and looked at me with that same watchful expression. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to actually answer it." I sat down across from her, on a small ottoman that was probably not meant for sitting. "Okay. When's the last time you were okay?" I opened my mouth. "Not fine," she said. "Okay. Actual okay." I closed my mouth. The floor lamp made a small circle of light between us. Outside the window, the party sounds were muffled and distant, the way things sound when you've moved to a room where you can finally hear yourself. "I don't know," I said, which was the most honest thing I'd said out loud in 8 months. She nodded like that was the answer she expected. I stayed in that room for an hour. We talked about Carla briefly, which was more than I'd expected and less than I thought I needed. Nadia didn't defend her sister. She didn't attack her either. She just said, at one point, "Carla's always needed the next thing. It's not bad, it's who she is. You're not that." "What am I?" I asked. She thought about it. Actually thought about it, which I'd stopped expecting people to do. "You're someone who wants to know exactly where you're standing before you take a step," she said. "That's not a flaw, it just means you need different things than she did." I didn't say anything. The lamp made its circle of light. I think about that sentence a lot. We went back downstairs after a while. Derek caught my eye across the room and raised his beer. Nadia found her friends. We didn't talk again that night, not really, just a brief goodbye near the door, A moment where I said this was good, and she said yeah, and we both meant more than what we'd said. I drove home with the cheap silver ring still in my jacket pocket. I didn't throw it out that night. I told myself it was because I forgot. That was May. And I didn't see Nadia again for 6 weeks, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to do with wanting to, and I've always been better with clear lines than with the complicated territory in between. There's a version of me that would have found a reason to call. That version knew she'd given me a reason, or something close to it. The version of me who actually existed in June talked to Derek, who told me Nadia had asked about me. He said it like it was information. He didn't say what he thought I should do with it. So I thought about it. The way I think about everything, measured, careful, standing at the edge of something and trying to figure out exactly where the line is. What I hadn't figured out yet was that Nadia was not a line. Nadia was a whole territory I didn't have a map for, and 6 weeks after that party, my phone rang. It was Carla. I want you to pay attention to this part. Not because of what she said wasn't complicated, but because of what I did with it. She said she'd been thinking. She said she'd made a mistake. She said the whole thing, the move, the decision, the way it ended, she said she'd been running from something, and she'd figured that out, and she wondered if we could talk. I said I'd think about it. And here is the thing about me. The thing that Carla always pointed out, and that I never quite believed until I was sitting in my car in a parking garage afterward, not starting the ignition. I think about things longer than they require thinking about. I sit on edges. I measure and remeasure before I draw the line. It's useful in my profession. It's less useful when someone you used to love calls and says, maybe, and someone you might be starting to love exists somewhere in the city, and you're sitting in a parking garage doing nothing while both of those things are simultaneously true. I said I'd think about it. And in the meantime, because a land surveyor really should know better, I started seeing Nadia. The first time Nadia and I had dinner, just the two of us, not a party, not a borrowed porch. She showed up 7 minutes late and apologized twice. I'm a serial over-apologizer, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Fair warning. Noted, I said. I'm also always a little late, but never more than 10 minutes. That's my system. You have a lateness system. Doesn't everyone? I thought about it. I'm always exactly on time. She looked at me. That's either very efficient or a little frightening. Probably both, I said. And she smiled. And the waiter came. And that was how the first hour went, easy. Like something that had already been broken in, like furniture you didn't have to learn how to sit on. We went to a Thai place on Ramon Street that she'd picked. She ordered without looking at the menu, which told me she'd been there before, which for some reason I found steadying the idea that she had a life full of places she returned to. I was still getting used to the idea of returning to anywhere. That dinner lasted 3 hours. It went from the restaurant to a coffee place next door, to a walk around the block that extended itself another 4 blocks, because neither of us wanted to make the decision to stop walking. We talked about her law school, questioned more she'd been reading about it, had looked at 2 programs, was still circling it the way I circled things, and I told her that, and she said, maybe it's contagious, and I said, probably don't catch it, and she laughed. She laughed with her whole face. Not performatively, she didn't throw her head back or cover her mouth. It was just a complete expression, everything moving at once. And it lasted exactly as long as the funny thing warranted, and not a second longer. I noticed I was cataloging her, the way you catalog something you're worried about losing. Walking back to her car, she asked me how the job was going. I told her about the survey we'd been doing for a disputed property out in the county, 2 families. 1 old fence line, 30 years of disagreement about 6 inches of land. I told her how we'd found evidence that the original survey from the 70s had been done wrong, that someone had made an error no one caught, and that now the line that both families had built their lives around was in the wrong place. What happens now? She said. We draw the correct line. Someone's going to be unhappy. Which family? The one that's been right all along. Ironically. Because they built their fence in the right place, but everyone's been telling them for 30 years that they were wrong. She was quiet for a moment. That's a terrible story. It's a very common story, I said. She looked at me sideways. You like what you do? I do. Why? I thought about it the way I'd been trying to think about everything lately, actually. Instead of reflexively, because there's always a right answer, I said. It might take a while to find it. But it exists. The correct line is somewhere. I just have to measure carefully enough. She stopped walking. We were at the corner of something, I forget which street. Do you think that's true for everything? She said. I used to, I said. I'm less sure now. She looked at me for a moment, then started walking again. Okay, she said. Quietly. Like she was putting that somewhere. I thought about that answer the whole drive home. We saw each other again the next week, and the week after. It developed the way things develop when two careful people decide to let something happen without quite admitting they've decided incrementally, plausibly, deniably, with enough ambiguity that you can still tell yourself you don't know where it's going, even when you do. I still hadn't told her about Carla's call. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't calculation. It was something smaller and worse. I didn't say anything because saying it would require me to also say what I'd done with it, and what I'd done with it was nothing, and doing nothing had started to feel like a decision I'd made without quite deciding. I hadn't called Carla back. I had not said yes, and I had not said no, and I had let 3 weeks become 4, become 6, while I ate dinner with her sister and walked 4 extra blocks to avoid ending an evening and noticed the specific way Nadia's expression went still when she was thinking about something difficult. This is the thing I got wrong. The thing that I knew, even then, was wrong, and that I did anyway. I am a person who marks clear lines for a living. I had let something stay unmeasured because measuring it meant knowing the answer. Nadia never asked about Carla directly. In the early weeks, she mentioned her sister once, something about a family birthday dinner she'd had to attend. Something brief. She moved past it quickly and I moved with her. Looking back now, I think she was watching to see if I'd stop her. I didn't. There was a night in late July 7th week of whatever this was, 8th. I'd stopped counting where we were at my apartment, sitting on the floor with the remnants of takeout between us, and she picked up the small framed photo on my book. It was a landscape from a trip I'd taken years ago, before Carla, before any of this. She held it, looked at it, set it back. This is the only picture you have out, she said. I know. You should put more things out. I haven't, I started. I know, she said. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying. She looked at me for a moment, then away. There was something underneath that I didn't pursue. Another border I stood at and didn't cross. The ring was on my bookshelf by then. I'd moved it from my jacket pocket when the weather changed and I'd stopped wearing that jacket. It sat next to the photo on the second shelf, the cheap silver band that turns your finger green, and I'd never once thought about why I kept moving it instead of throwing it away. Things accumulate without permission. You stop noticing them. Then one day someone's sitting on your floor and she looks at the shelf and she can see every single thing on it. Nadia never mentioned the ring, but she saw it. I know she saw it. The call from Carla came again on a Wednesday night in early August. I was in my car outside a hardware store. I'd stopped to pick up something for a repair at my apartment, something mundane, a particular kind of anchor bolt, and my phone rang, and I looked at the name, and I sat there for a moment. I picked up. She didn't start with hello. Carla never started with hello. She started in the middle, as if the conversation had already been going on and she was just now deciding to speak. I think we should meet, she said. Neutral place, just to talk. Carla, I'm not asking for anything dramatic. I just want to sit across from you. I looked at the hardware store. I thought about the anchor bolt. I thought about what I was building and whether I had the correct equipment. Yeah, I said. Okay. We met at a diner on the east side 2 days later. Neutral was the right word. It was exactly the kind of place where nothing permanent could happen, where the lighting was bright, and the coffee was mediocre, and the booths were designed to keep your spine upright. I was there first. She arrived exactly on time, which she always did, and I thought for some reason about Nadia telling me she was always a little late but never more than 10 minutes. Carla looked the same. That sounds like it shouldn't be notable, but there's something disorienting about seeing someone you were once married to and finding them unchanged, finding that life has just continued for them in their own shape. She sat down. She ordered coffee. She looked at me and said, "You look better." "Than what?" "Than the last time I saw you." We talked for almost 2 hours. It was a conversation I can describe fairly but not completely, because some of it is private in ways that have nothing to do with the story I'm trying to tell, and some of it I don't fully trust my memory of. What I can tell you is that she said she'd been seeing someone and it hadn't worked out, and that had made her think. I can tell you that she used the word mistake twice, and I felt different things both times. I can tell you that she reached across the table at one point and put her hand over mine, and I did not pull away. What I can also tell you is that while I was sitting in that diner, not pulling away, Nadia sent me a text. I saw it come in. I turned my phone face down. I told myself it was just because I was in the middle of a conversation, which was true, which was also not the whole truth. I texted her back an hour later, after I'd driven home, parked, and sat in the car for 17 minutes. I said I'd been at a work thing, which was not true, and that we should get together Thursday, which was true. She said Thursday worked. I drove to Thursday having still said nothing. The night before, I took the ring off the bookshelf. I held it for a moment, this stupid, cheap silver band, and I thought about what exactly I was doing. I was doing what I always did. I was standing at the edge of something, taking careful measurements, telling myself I needed more information before I could draw the line. But the thing about boundaries is that every day you leave them unmarked, someone is building on the wrong side. Thursday was a museum. Her idea, she'd gotten tickets to a photography exhibit, black and white, American landscapes, the kind of photos where you can feel the wind even in print. We moved through the rooms at different speeds, circling back to each other. There was one photograph she stopped at for a long time. A field in Nebraska, a fence running through it, the line of the fence not quite straight, bending slightly where the land dipped. "This one's sad," she said. "Why?" "Because you can see where they tried to hold something and it didn't quite hold." I looked at the photograph. I looked at Nadia. "I have to tell you something," I said. She turned. Her expression didn't change, but something underneath it went very still. "Carla called me," I said, "a couple months ago. And again, 2 weeks ago. We met for coffee on Friday." The room was quiet around us. There were other people in the exhibit, but they'd moved to different photographs. "Okay," she said. It was the same word she'd used that night on the corner, the one that meant she was filing something away, except this one had a different texture. She said she made a mistake. She wanted to see if there was something still there. Is there? I had practiced an answer to this on the drive over. It had involved a careful, honest account of my uncertainty, an acknowledgement that I had complicated feelings, a responsible explanation of why I'd needed time to know, I said, not because I'd decided that on the drive over, because saying it out loud was the moment I actually decided. Nadia looked at me. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because telling you meant knowing that." And I stopped. I wasn't sure until right now. "That's not entirely comforting, Marcus." "I know." She looked back at the photograph. The Nebraska field. The fence that didn't quite hold. "When we were at your apartment," she said, slowly, "and I saw the ring on the shelf." She stopped. "The ring was from before Carla," I said. "I never even figured out whose it was. I found it under a car seat and I never threw it out. I don't know why." She looked at me. "I thought it was hers." I hadn't known she'd thought that. I hadn't even occurred to me that she'd seen it as anything other than clutter. Looking back now, I understand exactly what she'd been carrying for the last 6 weeks, the image of me with a ring I couldn't let go of. Seeing her right through that context, saying nothing, going to dinner with her anyway. From the outside, what I'd looked like was a man who hadn't fully let go, which was not nothing, which was a real question. I just hadn't understood she was asking it. It wasn't hers, I said. But you kept it. I keep things I don't know what to do with. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. Not warm, not cold, just accurate. We walked through 2 more rooms without talking. Not a punishing silence. She didn't pull away or signal that the day was over. But she moved differently, like someone carrying something carefully, making sure not to jostle it. At the exit, she stopped and turned to face me. I need you to understand something, she said. I've been aware of this of you for a while, not just since the party. Longer than that. I've been careful with it because I knew it was complicated, and because I know what Carla's capable of, and because... She stopped, chose the words. Because I don't do things halfway. If I'm in something, I'm in it, and I need to know that the person across from me is actually there. I'm here, I said. I believe you mean that right now, she said. I just need it to still be true in a month. She picked up her bag. She gave me a look I couldn't entirely read, careful, considered, holding something she wasn't ready to put down. Call me, she said. She walked out. And then something happened. My phone rang. It was Carla. I looked at the screen. I looked at the museum door swinging closed. I let it ring. And then I thought about a conversation I'd had with my colleague Ray on a job site 3 months earlier. Ray's 62, been surveying since before GPS existed, still does half his measurements by hand because he doesn't trust machines with anything important. We'd been on a property in the South County, trying to establish the correct line on a parcel that had 3 different claims on it, and Ray had said something I'd filed away without thinking much about at the time. He'd said, "The problem isn't that people don't know where the line is, the problem is they're hoping it's somewhere other than where it is, so they keep measuring, and measuring, and measuring, hoping the ground shifts. It doesn't." I let it ring. The phone went to voicemail. I had not resolved anything. I had not fixed anything. I had not earned anything, but I had finally stopped measuring something I already knew the answer to. Here's what I hadn't figured out yet. Standing outside that museum with my phone going silent in my pocket, the cheap silver ring on my bookshelf at home, and Nadia's car turning out of the parking lot. Carla didn't call because she'd made a mistake. Carla called because Nadia had told her. I didn't know that yet. I found out 6 days later. The person who told me was Derek. He called on a Thursday morning while I was on a job site out in the county, standing in the middle of a field with a total station tripod and a reading that wasn't matching my notes. I almost didn't pick up. I picked up. "Hey," he said, and his voice had that particular flatness it gets when he's about to say something he doesn't want to say. I've known Derek since we were 23. I know every register his voice has. "What?" I said. "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to not react immediately." I looked at the field. The grass was high, seed heads gone to yellow, and the wind was moving through it in one direction like a signal. "Okay." Carla reached out to Nadia 2 weeks before she called you the second time. I held the phone. Nadia didn't tell her anything, Derek said. Nadia didn't confirm anything. Apparently Carla had figured out you two had been spending time together, I don't know how, and she called Nadia to ask her directly if something was happening. What did Nadia say? From what? "I understand," she said. "That was a question Carla should ask you." I was quiet. "The thing is," Derek said, and then he stopped and started again. "The thing is that Carla calling you the second time the diner, all of that wasn't her working something out. That was her doing something deliberate. She knew. Marcus, she knew where things were going, and she wanted to." He stopped again. "I don't know exactly what she wanted. But it wasn't what she said it was. I looked at the total station. I looked at my notes. The reading that wasn't matching. "How do you know this?" I said. "Nadia told me. Last week. She was trying to figure out if she'd done something wrong by not telling you, and she called me because he paused. Because she didn't know who else to call, I guess. I thought about Nadia at the museum, saying I need to know that the person across from me is actually there. I thought about the shape of those 2 weeks, me and Carla at the diner, me turning my phone face down, me texting I was at a work thing. I thought about Nadia carrying that conversation with Carla, carrying the knowledge of it, going to the museum with me anyway, standing in front of that photograph of the fence that didn't quite hold. She'd known the whole time. She'd given me the chance to tell her myself. "I have to go," I said to Derek. "Yeah," he said. "I know." I stood in that field for another 20 minutes, not thinking, exactly more like waiting for the readings to settle, the way you do when the ground is soft and the instrument hasn't quite stabilized. Around me, the seed heads moved in the wind. 6 inches to my left, according to my notes, was the correct property line. The line that had been wrong for years. The line that was just dirt, just grass, just a number on a page, until someone stood in front of it and said, "This is where it actually is." I packed up the equipment. I drove back to the office and told Ray I needed the afternoon. He looked at me for a long moment. "Everything all right?" he said. "Getting there," I said, which was the most accurate thing I could manage. I drove to Carla's apartment. I want to be precise about this, because I've replayed it enough times that the edges have gotten worn, and I don't want to give the confrontation more drama than it had. It wasn't a scene. It was a short, quiet, terrible conversation between two people who knew each other well enough that most of it didn't need to be said out loud. She opened the door and I could tell from her face that she'd already heard I was coming. Not from me, I hadn't called. But Carla has always had a network, a way of knowing things before they arrive at her door. She'd had 6 years to study me, and she knew what I looked like when I'd figured something out. She stepped back and let me in. I didn't sit down. "You called Nadia?" I said. She crossed her arms. Not defensively, Carla doesn't do defensive. Bracing. More like, "I did. Before you called me the second time." "Yes." "Why?" She looked at me for a moment. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen from her in years, not guilt. Exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. The recognition of a thing she'd done that she couldn't argue herself out of but also couldn't quite apologize for, because apologizing would require admitting that it was wrong, and Carla has never been able to fully occupy that particular room. "Because I needed to know if it was real," she said. "What was happening with the two of you?" "So you could what?" "So I could decide what I wanted to do, and what you decided to do was call me and say you'd made a mistake. I had made a mistake." "Carla." She looked at me steadily. "I had. Marcus. That part was true, but it wasn't all of the truth." A long pause. Outside the window, the sound of a city bus going by. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. "I thought if you were going to," she stopped, recalibrated. "I thought if something was actually happening with Nadia, I wanted you to have to choose. On purpose, not just drift into it the way you drift into things. You wanted to force a decision. I wanted to know if I mattered enough to complicate things." I stood there for a moment with that sentence. "That's not," I said, slowly, "a small thing to have done." "No," she said. "It isn't." She didn't tell me. She sat across from me and she knew. And she didn't tell me she waited for me to figure it out. Carla looked at me. Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read but that I thought might have been the closest thing to real feeling she'd let out during this entire conversation. "She wouldn't," she said, quietly. "Nadia doesn't operate that way." "How does Nadia operate?" She looked at me for a long moment. And this is the part that stayed with me, not anything I said, not any answer I gave, it's what Carla said next. Said quietly, without her usual precision, as if she was working it out even as she spoke it. "She sees people, Carla said. The whole person, she always has. I used to think it was a liability. She stopped. I think I was wrong about that. I left shortly after, not with anger, not with resolution, not with the clean feeling you're supposed to get from a confrontation that goes the way it was supposed to go, just with the truth finally laid out flat, the way a survey plat lays out flat when you unroll it on a table, every line in the correct place, nothing hidden anymore, the whole picture available at once. I sat in my car outside her building for a little while. Then I drove home. The ring was on the bookshelf where I'd left it. I picked it up. Held it in my palm for a moment. It was lighter than I expected it always was. Every time I picked it up, like I kept anticipating it would have accumulated weight. Cheap silver, adjustable band, going green at the edges, a ring that belonged to someone I'd never know, that had ended up under a car seat, that I'd moved from jacket pocket to bookshelf to jacket pocket and back, without ever once deciding what it meant. I walked to my kitchen window and I looked out at the alley behind my building, and then I set the ring down on the windowsill. Not threw it away. Set it down. I'm still working out the difference. I called Nadia that evening. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was neutral, present, but measured, giving me the space to be whatever I was about to be. I know about the call, I said. Carla and you. I know she called before she called me. A pause. Okay. Why didn't you tell me? She was quiet for a moment. Because you needed to figure out what you wanted, without it being about her having done something wrong. If I told you, then your choice would have been about Carla. I wanted it to be about you. I sat with that. That's either the most patient thing anyone's ever done for me, I said, or the most terrifying. Both, she said, and I could hear the edge of something, not a smile, not quite. Something just beneath it. Probably both. I went to see her today, I said. Carla. I know. She texted me. I wasn't surprised. I didn't know if I was supposed to be surprised. What did she say? She said you were finally acting like yourself. I looked at the ceiling of my apartment. That might be the nicest thing she said about me in 3 years. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Are you okay? Not fine. Okay. The same distinction she'd drawn 9 weeks ago in a room at the end of a hallway, with a floor lamp making a circle of light and the party sounds muffled below us. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. She said, Good. And that was not the end of anything or the beginning of everything. It was just a Thursday evening in August with the windows open and the city outside doing what cities do. Nothing resolved. Nothing finished. But the line in the right place, finally, and both of us standing on our correct side of it. We got dinner the following Saturday. And the Saturday after that, the ring sat on the windowsill for 11 days. I noticed it every morning when I made coffee, the way you notice things that have been in the same spot long enough to become part of the background. On the 12th day, I threw it in the trash without ceremony, without pausing, without any of the weight I'd expected. It made a small sound when it hit the bottom of the can. That was all. Some things don't need a whole story. They just need you to finally know what they are. It's October now. The survey job I'd been working when Derek called the disputed property. The family that had been right all along, we finished it last week. Filed the plat. Drew the correct line. The family that had been building on the wrong side took it badly, which I understood, and the family that had been right all along took it quietly, which I also understood. They'd spent 30 years being told they were wrong. Being told you were right doesn't always feel the way you thought it would. Sometimes it just feels like the ground finally settling under your feet. Nadia got her law school acceptance 2 weeks ago, one of the programs she'd been circling. She called me on her lunch break and said it in the middle of a sentence about something else, casually, like she was still deciding whether it counted as real. I told her it counted. She said she was still thinking. I said that was fine, that she should think as long as she needed to. She said, That's rich, coming from you. I said, Yeah, I know. She laughed, the whole face laugh. All of it at once, and I stood at the window of my office looking out at a parking lot, and I thought, I know exactly where I'm standing. That's not a small thing. The last time I surveyed something new, I was out at a parcel on the north edge of the county. Early morning, fog still on the grass, the kind of morning where the horizon is just a suggestion. I set up the instrument. I took the first reading, and I thought about what I said to Nadia that night on Ramon Street, that I used to believe there was always a correct line, and I was less sure now. I think I was wrong to be less sure. The correct line always exists. It's not always where you hoped it would be. It's not always convenient, but it's there, waiting, precise down to the inch, indifferent to how long you took to find it. You just have to be willing to put the stake in the ground. I put mine in. Sometimes the person who finally sees you isn't the one you were trying to be seen by, and sometimes the bravest thing isn't the grand choice, it's just stopping measuring something you already knew the answer to. I held on to that ring for 8 months without ever deciding what it meant. Have you ever carried something, an object, a silence, a text you never sent that you kept moving from place to place instead of letting it go? Not because you forgot, just because deciding felt like too much. Drop that in the comments. I want to know. If this story sat with you somewhere real, leave a like, it tells me what kind of stories to keep telling. And if you want more, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be here with the next one.